Hey, everybody, welcome back to Build It with Tim. On today's episode, we're going to be building an event registration app that allows users to register for any given event, and we're going to keep track of how many registrations there are as a total limit and how many registrations are remaining after users actually register. The goal here is to build a system in which users can register when there are registrations remaining, but will not be able to register once the registrations are full. To get started with this build, we're going to start with a brand new application. So we're going to quickly go through the quick start wizard, and we're going to install a event management application. And once the app is created, we're going to take a look at the actual data tables that are already created. So some of these are useful for us already right from the beginning. What we're going to focus on is the events table. In this particular data table, we have a bunch of fields that are designed to store information about our particular event. You can see we have two records in here already with an event name, a date, time, and some other internal information like how much the event is going to cost and the status and any notes. Okay, so we're going to be using this table as the actual event that we put out to the world. We're going to make a public page that allows people to actually register for this particular event. And to do that, we need to make a couple of modifications to our data structure. So the first thing we need to add is a brand new data table, and that's going to be called registrations. The purpose of this table is to actually store the individual and the unique registrations per event. And the way we are going to connect the registration to the event is through a connection field. Next, we need to make a decision about how we want to actually display this registration form to people. Now, I did mention previously that we're going to have this be public because that's the decision that I made. But if you wanted people to actually create an account before they register, then we could add an additional connection to the users table. So that way, we are not only connecting a registration to an event, but we are also connecting a registration to a unique user. Now, again, in my case, it's just going to be a public form, which means I'm going to need to add some fields to gather user information. So we'll start with a text field just for the user's name and an email field for their email. Now, there can be other fields that you may wish to add to this particular table, but that's entirely up to you. Now, the next thing we need to do is go back to our events data table. Inside this data table is where we want to track and store information about how many registrations there are per event. We need this data to be saved in this data table so that we can use it in the page builder as a reference point. So I'm going to make three fields here. The first one is going to be a number field where we are going to set a registration limit per event. So whether you have 10 spots or 50 spots, we can designate that on the particular record or event record through the registration limit field. The next one I'm going to do is a complex formula, which is going to do a count function. And this is going to be the total registrations per event. And in order to actually calculate it per event, we're going to select the registrations table to count in, and then we'll choose our formula function of count, and that will tell us how many total registration records per event live in this data table. The last field we're going to add is a number formula, which is going to tell us how many registrations are remaining. And to do this calculation, we'll simply take the registration limit and subtract the total registrations. Okay, now we can start to configure our registration limit here. We'll do something like 10. And just for testing purposes here, we'll do 2. You can see that our registrations remaining field is already calculating and letting us know that we have 10 registrations remaining for the first event and 2 registrations remaining for the second. And so at this point, we're ready to move on to the page builder, and we're going to build a very simple page structure that allows somebody to view events, then view the event details, and register right on the event detail page. We're going to move over to the page builder, and we will add a new page. And we can call this events, put it on a layout of your choice. And this, we will choose a list component, just personal preference. And we'll choose the events data table to display the records. And now we have our list component. Now, I don't need to show all of these fields. All I really want to show here are the event name, event date and time, and we'll do registrations remaining. Then I'll modify the layout a little bit. Actually, let's do 2 columns. And then we'll hop back to fields and we're going to add a record detail page. All right, so by adding this link to the list component is going to create a child page that will display more information about this particular event. And on that page, we will actually add our form. Now, before we actually preview this to see what this is going to look like, we will hop over to the event detail page and we'll quickly configure this because it will only take a second to add a form component. But first, I'm going to change around my detail component a little bit. I don't need to see all of these particular fields, or rather, I don't need to present all of these fields to the user who's actually registering. So we can put things like the registration limit and the registrations remaining here. And then below that, we'll add a new row with a form component inside to add a new connected registration. Now, when we're looking at a page like this where it's asking what would you like this form to accomplish, we have to take special notice of the individual headings that we have for our various options. So I could create a form to edit the page event. I could also add a form to add new records within any given data table. But in my case, I want to create a form to add new connected records to this event, and I'm going to choose registration records. Now, for the form itself, all I want to do is allow somebody to input their name and their email. I'm going to make these particular fields required. And our basic page structure is now complete. So let's go ahead and preview this page now. And what we see is our 2 events. And when we click on the registration button, it's going to take us to the event detail page where we could then fill out the registration form to actually register for this particular event. So once I save this form, you're going to see I have now taken a registration spot, and now there's only 9 registrations remaining. But we haven't actually set up all of the validation and the checks to prevent users from doing a couple things. Mainly, we don't want to show this form at all, or rather this entire page, once the registrations are closed. And registrations are closed when the registrations remaining equals 0. The other thing that we want to account for here is that we don't want somebody to register twice. And we can do both of those things by jumping back to the page builder. And all we need to do is make a couple of tweaks on this event details page. The first thing we need to do, as I mentioned, is actually block this page when registrations are closed. So we'll jump to page rules, add a new rule, and we will choose to show a message. We can customize our message, choose how we want to display it, and then add a condition. Now, in our case, we want to show this when registrations remaining gets less than 1, right? When it equals 0. So there's 2 kind of ways that we can check if something is 0. But first, we're going to choose registrations remaining. And we can either say is lower than 1, or 0 is the same thing as blank in this case. So we could choose is blank. After we save this page rule, we should be good to go. So if I jump back to the live app, we can test this by going to registration for the given golf tournament, which only has a limit of 2. And I'll just fill out this form twice to fill up those registration spots. Okay, so this will make our registrations remaining 0. Now, if I try to go back to this particular event to register, I'm going to trigger that page rule and be displayed the message that's saying registrations are currently full. Now, the other problem that we need to fix here is what you just saw me do, which is I registered as the same person for the same event twice. To fix that, we're going to simply add a validation rule to our registration form that checks for uniqueness for the records that are being created. So under rules and validation rules, we can add a new validation rule that says event is not unique, and we'll also check that the email is not unique as well. And then we need to enter a message here. You've already registered for this event. So to check that, we will simply go back to the weekend convention event and try to register with the same name and email. Although I do realize we're not actually checking the name, we're only checking the email. But you can see that Tim at Tadabase.io has already registered for this event. But if I change the email slightly, we can then register, and we've taken that registration spot. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you quickly is, again, it comes down to personal preference. But if you are displaying a list of events for people to register for, you have the option, of course, to hide any particular events that don't have any registrations remaining. Or if you still want to advertise that particular event, you can choose to keep it here. But if you do want to hide it, then we can go back to our parent level page where we are displaying all of the events, and we can add a data source filter. And the filter that we're going to set up here is only show records when the registrations remaining is higher than 0. And if we jump back to our live app and refresh, you'll see that the golf tournament event is now hidden because there are no registrations remaining. All right, so that's it for this week's episode of Build It with Tim. We now have a super fast and easy way to handle event registration and build in some preventative measures to make sure that we hit our registration limit and don't allow for any more registrations, and to prevent people from registering twice for the same event. All right, so thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Take care.